Okay, assalamu alaikum. I had a former student who's asked me really quick, what's going on with Palestine? What's the divisiveness, Palestine, Gaza, all of that. Um, and I just wanted to try to recommend some resources. One is If Americans Knew. Um, Allison Weir is the sponsor of that, American woman. She's amazing. I've heard her lecture, I met her, read her book. And Great title, If Americans Knew What Every American Needs to Know About Israel Palestine. And I think the first thing that you need to know is that, um, you know, it that I would recommend a book called The 4,000 Palestine and 4,000 Years History. There's a lot of books I'd recommend by Normal Solha. And this book is excellent. And it really goes over, the ancient history of Palestine. Norse Masalha is a scholar. He has written a lot of books on Palestine, and he knows its history very well. And so, you know, there always have been people, indigenous people in Palestine, in the area. Um, we have archaeological records of them that go back to the 13th century BC. As far as the word paliset, you have it, on the Ramses III in his temple in Edfu in Egypt. He refers to the paliset, which is paliset, the consonants that make up the word Palestine. So you have that. Um, Actually, before you have any archaeological evidence for the word Israel, right? Um, Israel doesn't come into being until really around 1,000, and it's much smaller, and it doesn't last that long. Um, anyway, Palestine. So if you know Herodotus, the father of history, the Greek father of history, as they call him, who is basically contemporary of Socrates and uh, um, Plato and Aristotle and all them. He calls Palestine Palestine. As do, so all these people in this, what they call the Axis Age in Greece, would have called it Palestine. There are pagan philosophers in Palestine in pre-Christianity. When Christianity comes to Palestine, there's church fathers from Palestine. And Gaza is extremely old. Um, you know, Gaza goes back, Alexander the Great's there. Herodotus goes there. He doesn't even mention Jews when he writes about Palestine, by the way. Um, um, and Gaza, really ancient trade city, entrepot city, really important. Um, so basically, there's always been people in Palestine, and you have the ancient Jews. Now, the ancient Jews, even by the biblical kind of, narrative, they are not indigenous to Palestine. They're given, Abraham was not a Jew. He's they call him the father of Jews, Christians, Muslims, whatever, but he wasn't a Jew. His son, he has the sons Isaac and Ishmael, or Ishaq and Ismail, and um, a branch of the Arabs come from Ismail or Ishmael, and other what become the Jews, come from Isaac. Isaac, um, anyway, so this is, I mean, the biblical narrative is one thing, and the historical narrative is another. But they were all Semitic people, from Noah, his Ham, Shem, and Japheth, the three sons, alleged, and so they say they're from Shem, Sem, Semitic. Um, languages are similar. Hebrew was, by Jesus's time, for all intents and purposes, a dead language. Hebrew, now that's spoken, is reconstructed. It's poorly reconstructed. Doesn't sound anything like ancient Hebrew, because it's a whole bunch of Europeans speaking it, and they mess it all up, and they can't differentiate between the ha and the cha. There's a whole bunch of shifts that are very regular. They used Arabic in the late 19th century to try and reconstruct the language. And anyway, if I was going to say, I mean, this is one good, really good resource for contemporary, what's going on now. There's a lot of good resources. And I'll link to that. For the ancient Palestine and the history of Palestine, I would go to Noor Masalha's book. It is the best. It's on audiobook. How everybody should have this in their library. Um, now the story that usually is told is that, the Jews have a kingdom, and then they get, conquered by the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and then it's the Persian Cyrus the Great who has them come back in the 5th century BC to Jerusalem, and resettle. And then within a couple centuries, they're conquered again by Alexander, by the what they call the Seleucids under Alexander, and then the Romans conquer. And so they're under the rule of the Romans, and they have some revolts around the time of Jesus. And you have the most famous, the Arch of Titus, right? That revolt, where it shows, them carrying off the candelabra and other stuff from the temple, right? That's in the 70 of the Common Era. And then you have the Bar Kokhba revolt in 140. And, conventionally they'll say, well, the Jews were driven out by the Romans, but you don't really have archaeological or really, really solid literary evidence of a lot of that. It seems a lot of Jews stayed. There was more of a diaspora already. A lot of people were converting in the Roman Empire, and that basically Jews who later, they converted, and a lot of Palestinians, Jews and Palestinians are very closely. The original Jews are very closely related to Palestinians. And there's all kinds of people in Palestine, but a lot of them became Christian. Christianity started in Palestine, and in the 7th century, when Islam came, the Christians had kicked out Jews again, and Omar, in I believe it's 642, the second caliph, he invites all the Christians back when the Muslims are invited in to take Jerusalem, and he gives them freedom of worship and religion. And really, there was a strong kind of symbiotic, like kind of healthy relationship between Jews and Muslims. We don't have a tradition of anti-Semitism. We, speaking as a Muslim, as far as Europeans, there's a long tradition of anti-Semitism. It's very deep. My second master's first is in English, is in linguistics, and my second is in English literature. So I could write papers on anti-Semitism, and because I wrote primarily on the representation of Muslims in European literature, Orientalism, things like that, it really intersected with how they represented Jews, and it was different, but there were similarities. So what happens is, not a lot of Jews in Palestine. There are different theories. I would recommend a guy named Shlomo Sands, who is Israeli historian. His book, The Invention of the Jewish People, is really good. And he talks about a lot of those things. He's a very honest intellectual. I would recommend him highly. But basically, by the time you get to So what you have, about a month ago, I finished this book called A Short History of Christian Zionism, which was not very short. It's about 300 pages. And um, it's Christians who have an idea of Zionism first, the idea that Jews should dominate Palestine, rebuild Israel as an a Jewish state. It's Christians who do that. And it's Protestant Christians. It's this like weird Protestant sect that really doesn't, Catholics didn't believe that. Protestants, like Lutheran Orthodox, didn't believe it. It was little splinter groups. And they gained a little bit of popularity in the early 1800s under the British Empire with evangelical Zionists. Evangelical movement was booming in Britain, going to, they wanted to civilize all the backwards people of the world that they were conquering. Gave them It gave them justification, a white man's burden, like Rudyard Kipling's poem, that white men would bring their Christianity to everybody and everybody be enlightened from it and the superiority of the civilization. So, you have it, and some influential British ministers and moneyed people are interested in it. But it doesn't go very far. And it has something to do with some Protestants to well, anyway, yeah. I won't talk about too much. Then you have like Jews are really treated horribly throughout European history, even way before the Holocaust and pogroms in the 19th century, even before that, the Crusades, as they're going to go kill Muslims, they're killing all the Jews they see on the way. It's a real thing. And whatever Jews did to assimilate, to kind of acculturate, to show that they were loyal, they became Christian, but it became like something that, it would be on, they wouldn't be trusted for generations, no matter how much they Christianized to a certain extent. And anti-Semitism got really bad, especially after the Dreyfus affair in France, and there was a lot of these people of Jewish descent. They were from white European families that there had been some mass conversions that had nothing to do. They're not genetically related to the original Jews of Palestine. They're European, and one of the famous ones was Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was the first kind of Zionist and like Jewish Zionist. And he writes the Judenstaat, the Jewish state, and he tries to sell the idea of a homeland for the Jews. And he's not sure where he wants it to be, but he wants to be somewhere they can have their nation state. Well, all the European nations were creating nation states and having empires, and they're like, look, we're white people too, and we should have our own kind of colonial enterprise. He said, writing to Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was he's a white colonizer in Africa who named a country after himself, Rhodesia, right? Co-owner of De Beers, the diamond company in South Africa. So Herzl, the father of modern Zionism, proposed a Jewish state in Palestine as an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism, meaning the backwards indigenous people who have been there forever. And taking his model, the British colony in South Africa described his project as something colonial. And there's a great book by Dr. Hatem Bazian, who I've known for 30 years, called It's Something Colonial. It's a great book, and it breaks things down. And he he grew up in the refugee camps in you can get it cheaper a couple other books in bookstores. There's a bookstore in Berkeley that sells it for like 30. Anyway. So what happens is he does all these things to trying to get people to go there and sells this colonization. In 1897 is the first Zionist council, and he's trying to get people to go settle in Palestine. Now, Jews have lived in Palestine. Muslims have been welcome. Muslim, Christians, Jews, no matter. Islam is tolerant, and but the fact of the matter is, by 1896, the population of Palestine is only 4% Jewish. It's 86% Christian. 10%, I'm sorry, 86% Muslim, 10% Christian, and 4% Jewish. But those are mostly Arabic speaking Jews who get along with the people there. What happened is you get all these like um different different you get these different invasions basically. And in these invasions they take more and more land and um let's see. Okay. This is yeah. Um and basically okay, so this goes over a lot of stuff here. Um yeah, okay. Basically, man, there's World War One, and the Arabs joined in World War One, and against the Ottoman Empire, and then from 1914 to 1918, the Ottomans lose, and so all their lands are split up between the European powers, and Britain gets the mandate of Palestine. Well, 3 years before, an anti-Semite named Lord Balfour it kind of got paid off, and he wrote a letter to the Rothschilds, and he said to Lord Rothschild, and he said, "Look, that he's going to establish a Jewish homeland in Palestine, so it's part of British colonization." And so he supports this, and still in the 1910s and 20s, there were, it's like 10% of the population was Jewish and 90% was Palestinian, and there's trying to feed people in, bring people in. Um, the Zionists, from the beginning, they're thinkers. They see themselves as the white man to the Indians. Basically, the Palestinians are like the Indians. So they're like, am I sharing this? I hope I'm sharing it. Um, so um, they said basically, Ben Gurion and Jabotinsky. Ben Gurion is the first prime minister of Israel, and Jabotinsky is the creator of their military, the Haganah, and uh, Chaim Weizman is the first president. They all say similar things that we will do to the Palestinians as the white man did to the red man in America. It's their, that's their plan. And so, that's what they try to do. Um, it's always been an ethnic cleansing endeavor. It is the Palestinians resisted it as much as they could. Um, and okay, and there's a buildup up until the establishment of the United Nations. The United Nations, there's clashes. They resist. The Palestinians resist. Britain had lost a lot of power after World War II, right? And so because it lost a lot of power, um, they kind of gave up. Well, they had been, actually the Zionists, the Israelis, bombed the King David Hotel. They assassinated peacemaking diplomats like Count Bernadette. They did a lot of terrorist stuff, and meanwhile they were building an army, and they were strong. They were working with the Nazis to funnel Holocaust survivors into Israel, or what they wanted to make Israel, even though it wasn't uh, their land. But anyway, they didn't. In 1948, they owned legally more like about 6% of the land of Palestine. It was almost all owned, and they had done through trickery, through bribery, through skullduggery. They had taken a lot of it. Um, so 1947 they launched attacks. 1948, and they lost giant attacks, and basically they did terrorist attacks. Like they slaughtered entire villages of people, like in Dier Yassin and Tantura, where they killed like 250 people and did it as an example. They raped the women, they cut fetuses out of pregnant women's bellies, and then and tortured and murdered and were ruthless. And then they publicized it so everybody would know. Um, Great book, Edward Said, The Question of Palestine. The partition was unjust. and it goes over the war. Dier Yassin, no, Dier Yassin. So is Dier. They did this massacre at Dier Yassin. And they said, as in Dier Yassin, so everywhere. I would highly recommend a book by Ilan Pappé, who is an Israeli historian. His short histories are good. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. Um, Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. There is also, if you're going to read, he has another book called The Biggest Prison in the World. I believe that's the name of it. I have it, and I've read it. It's about Gaza, but it didn't come up. Yeah, hold up. The Biggest Prison on Earth: History of Gaza, um, and the occupied territories. This isn't hyperbole, nor is it metaphor. I mean, it's very real. And I would advise, check these things out. If I was going to go, so basically, fast forward to, they took like half of the country illegally, and then, except for what was called the West Bank and the West Bank and the occupied territories I'm sorry, they're all occupied territories, and Gaza. And so there's ancient Palestine. Okay, ancient Palestine, Gaza Strip. Um, until 67, the 67 war. And this is where they took Gaza and the West Bank outright from Egypt and Jordan. And ever since then, they've been trying to take Jerusalem in full. 73, they took Sinai as well. Egypt got that back. Well, they fought a war in 73 to get it back, and then 78 got it back, but they normalized with Israel. And the U.S. has thrown its support, especially since Truman got paid off by the American Zionist lobby. And Weir has a really, Allison Weir has a great book on that. Lyndon B. Johnson really supported Israel, and he actually he was part ethnically Jewish on his mom's side, and which I was reading a book on Zionism from a Christian guy who writes on Christian literature. It wasn't like somebody trying to, he had no, he's on the other side of the argument, actually. So it was pretty tripped out. Where is the overview? Because they have the little, okay. Well, anyway, ever since, in the late 80s, there was a thing called the Intifada, the shaking off where Palestinians try to get free. There was a second Intifada in 2000 where a war criminal named Ariel Sharon tried to go to the Haram al-Sharif, the Masjid al-Aqsa complex in Jerusalem, and it offended everybody. It offended all the Muslims because, and Christians too. They don't like Christians, nor do they treat them well. Um, anyway, um, and so ever since in the aftermath of that, by 2006, there's always like they call it mowing the lawn when they periodically go and kill Palestinians. Um, 2006 they did that, and then they pulled Ariel Sharon, the same guy, he pulled all the settlers out of Gaza. Like they had militant settlers like who lived in fortified little high rises and communities, and worked to take the water and other resources from Palestinians. That's why the West Bank looks like that. Um, in the last picture of where it says Israel present is because all the water resources, the roads, it's made with illegal settlements, and all that should be, Palestinian land by all these different United Nations resolutions. But anyway, since then they've besieged Gaza. They built 30-foot high walls around Gaza. They have they'll shoot Gazans, they torture them, they take away their water, they pollute things, they don't let medicine in, they do all kinds of stuff. There's been as of 2023, it was like 16 years of this, right? More. And every year they're killing hundreds of Palestinians. There's something like 10,000 political prisoners in Israel of Palestinian, including children. There's also a lot of perverts in Israel, a lot of pedophiles. There's a lot of pedophiles from the United States who have fled to Israel. All you have to say is you're Jewish, and they take you. They have a right to return, even if you convert. I met white converts to Judaism who were going to live in Israel and said it was their birthright. Not the indigenous people who've been there for thousands and thousands of years. And so what was happening to make it really short, the U.S. got Egypt to normalize relations with Israel. It's the biggest military threat to Israel, biggest military, and they'd fought like 3 wars with Israel, and 56, 67, and 73. And so they kind of got Egypt to cooperate with them. And since then, they've been trying to put pressure on a lot of other Middle Eastern regimes to work with Israel, even though there's settler colonizers who have no justification for being there. And this really got stepped up with Trump and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And he pushed a thing. They were doing these interfaith dialogues, but there was with Zionists, international interfaith dialogues sponsored by the United Arab Emirates. And they got a lot of people to sell out. United Arab Emirates in 2020, there's the Abraham Accords, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, which barely had a government, and Morocco, all normalized relations with Israel under Trump, and who had the backing of evangelical Zionists. Big, crazy John Hagee, Pat Robertson, these really psycho, weird fundamentalists, who were saying it was prophecy that he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv, which had never been moved to Jerusalem, the U.S. embassy. And they're all there. It's prophecy, and Netanyahu's there, and everybody's there, and Jared Kushner and all them. And they made these agreements of permanent peace, the UAE and Bahrain and all these with Israel, which is against Islamic law. Like you can't make permanent peace with somebody who's oppressing and murdering and genociding Muslim people. You can make a temporary truce for like 10 years, but you can't do that. And Saudi Arabia was thinking, under Mohammed bin Salman, was thinking of making this permanent peace, making this normalization, and it wrote the Palestinians out of it. The Palestinians knew that there would be uh, a uh, there would be ethnic cleansing. There'd be a continuing an escalation of genocide. Before October 7th, there had been over 250 Palestinians, I think almost 500, but at least 250 killed, including children, in Palestine that year before October 7th. And they knew that if Saudi normalized, that would mean they're going to be ethnically cleansed. Exactly what Trump is saying to do would be done. Because it was Trump's son-in-law who got that deal done. But the Israelis have been trying to do that forever, especially Netanyahu. And so so the Palestinians in Gaza, they made this Al-Aqsa flood attack, which they're occupied people. Occupied people have the right under the international law to fight against their occupier. This is not it's not, you can debate it, but all people should have the same human rights, and they never accepted an occupying government, and they were literally fighting back to get their own land under international law, where the Israelis had built illegal military bases and illegal kibbutzim and illegal settlements. And you know, right away, uh, Israelis lied about all these atrocities. They've had to refute. They'd had to take them all back. There were no babies killed, like especially not, this, um, like directly. This guy was, oh, there were 40 beheaded babies. There were none, zero. I think there was one child who was accidentally killed, and we don't know who killed them because there's a thing called the Hannibal Directive that if the military feels um, that the Israeli military feels that their citizens are going to be taken hostage, then it's better to kill them. And so they opened fire, and about a third of the people killed, of the 1,200 people killed, were killed by the Israelis themselves. At least a third. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, has been admitting it. There was no rapes. That's a lie. There were no babies, beheaded babies, all that. It was all lies, and they've all been retracted. The New York Times, it was Israeli journalist, former IDF soldier for Israel who wrote those pieces. It was propaganda. It was lies. It's all been retracted. You know, and Israel does what it always does. Within a few days, death toll was way over 1,200. They were murdering people indiscriminately, attacking hospitals. Um, murdering children. They literally murder children. They this doctor who came here, who was there and who came to our community and spoke, and all the doctors I've heard interviewed have seen this, children under the age of 6 with bullets in their head. This has been going on for years. It's sicker than you can imagine, and I could tell you all kinds of things. But over the last 13 months, you know, um, sorry, it's more than 13 months, but the Israelis have been killing and genociding. I was out there for 15 months protesting. Um, and, you know, they were saying 40,000 Palestinians were killed, including 17,000 children last March, a year ago. Those were the official statistics. We have no great amount of verifiable statistics after that. The Lancet at that time, about 2 months later, by May in 2024, said the number is probably about 200,000 and maybe more, who have been killed. You know, it's a genocide under international law. It was before. If you look at all kinds of Jewish and Israeli scholars, Norman Finkelstein is another one to look up. He's amazing. I read a lot of his books. Really worth listening to. His book, Image and Reality in Israeli Palestinian Conflict, is great. His both of his parents were Holocaust survivors. There's a lot of these Jewish people who are very principled people, and they speak out. I think all people should do that. Speak out against their own people when they do something wrong, and value truth and human rights. And he's one of those people. Absolutely. Norman Finkelstein. But and Elon Papi is another. Shlomo Sands is another. There are a lot. I know Dr. Hatem. He's one of my favorite people. But there are a lot of voices. Noor Mossadegh's book is amazing. If Americans only knew, probably the best resource I know. So I'll try to do more later to kind of explain some of this stuff, but I hope that's a good beginning. Inshallah. Okay, take care. Um, how do I stop?